Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever had to learn, or honestly teach, the 3D architecture of the nervous system, you know it can be an absolute beast. But today, we're doing a masterclass on exactly how we navigate this incredible structure. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just trying to wrap your head around neuroscience, this is going to fundamentally change how you visualize the brain.
But think about it for a second. If I hand you a city map, you instantly look for north, south, east, and west, right? But what happens when you're handed a map of a biological structure as squishy and intricate as the human brain? How do you map a 3D object that literally has no obvious universal up or down? Unlike a regular geographical map, the brain requires entirely different compass coordinates. We essentially have to build a new spatial language from scratch.
Okay, let's dive right into our syllabus for today. Navigating the nervous system, the bent human neuraxis, the neuroanatomy compass, relative and functional directions, and finally, standard planes of section.
Section 1. Navigating the nervous system, a map maker's journey.
Imagine being an early neuroanatomist. You are basically an explorer in completely uncharted territory. You can't just point and say, hey, look at that squiggly part over there. To accurately describe this complex architecture, a rigorous, standardized system of references is completely non-negotiable. I want to emphasize that if you're entering biology, psychology, or neuroscience, mastering this vocabulary isn't just about passing a test. It is the absolute foundation. It's the universal language that allows a researcher in Tokyo to perfectly understand a surgeon in New York.
Section 2. The bent human neuroaxis, the foundational anchor. Every map needs a starting point, right? A prime meridian to anchor everything else. Before we can learn our directions, we need our absolute center. The neuraxis is an imaginary line drawn right through the center of the length of the central nervous system. It extends all the way from the bottom of the spinal cord straight up to the front of the forebrain. Lock this line into your mind right now, because it's the primary point of reference for every single directional term we're going to learn today.
And here is where it gets really fascinating. If you look at four-legged animals, quadrupeds like rats or alligators, their neuraxis is just a simple straight line from tail to snout. But humans, we stand upright. Because of our posture, our neuraxis contains a distinct bend at the exact junction where the midbrain meets the thalamus. Actually, try this right now. Physically tilt your head back a bit and imagine a 90-degree bend right inside your neck. Because of this evolutionary shift, the top of the human head sits perpendicular to our back. Section 3. The neuroanatomy compass, the binary rules.
So the crucial point to remember here, especially if you're trying to teach this to someone else, is that directions in the nervous system are typically described in pairs, and they are all relative to that neuraxis we just established. First pair, anterior versus posterior. The neat trick here is the literal linguistic translation. Anterior, or rostral, literally means toward the beak, referring to the head end. On the flip side, posterior, or caudal, means toward the tail, referring to the tail end, or away from the front of the face. Beak and tail. It's a perfect binary opposite to file away in your brain.
Next up, we have dorsal and ventral. Dorsal translates to back, and ventral translates to belly. But wait, think back to how the human bend changes things. In us humans, due to that 90-degree curve in our neck, the top of our brain is actually considered dorsal, and the bottom is ventral. This is true even though the top of our head is obviously not located on our back. Kind of wild, right?
Our final basic compass pair is medial versus lateral. Humans possess bilateral symmetry, meaning there's this invisible midline bisecting our nervous system into symmetrical right and left halves. If a structure is located moving inward toward that midline, we call it medial. If it's located moving outward, away from the midline and out toward the sides or your ears, we call it lateral.
Section 4. Relative and functional directions, adding complexity.
All right, let's step it up and look at relative relationships, describing where two specific locations are in relation to one another. Ipsilateral means structures on the same side of the body, like how your right ear is ipsilateral to your right eye. Contralateral means opposite sides. This one is massive in neuroscience because your left motor cortex actually controls your contralateral or right hand. Then we have superior, meaning above, and inferior, meaning below. So your mouth is inferior to your nose. Finally, proximal means near the center or point of attachment, while distal means toward the periphery, like the very end of a limb.
We also have functional directions to describe the flow of information. And honestly, here is the simplest memory trick you can ever use or teach for this. Step 1. Afferent with an A means arriving. These axons carry sensory information arriving toward the central nervous system. Step 2, the brain processes it. Step 3, efferent with an E means exiting. These axons carry motor commands exiting away from the CNS. A for arriving, E for exiting. Simple, clear, and incredibly effective.
Section 5. Standard planes of section. Slicing the 3D brain. Knowing the directions is great and all, but to actually view the internal structures of this three-dimensional brain, scientists have to slice it into standard two-dimensional planes. Let's start with the coronal plane, sometimes called a frontal section. The easiest way to picture this is to imagine slicing a loaf of bread. You take the slice perpendicular to the ground and perpendicular to the neuraxis, which beautifully divides the brain into front, or anterior, and back, or posterior parts.
But obviously, we don't just slice like a loaf of bread. A sagittal plane slices parallel to the neuraxis and perpendicular to the ground. If you make that cut exactly down the midline to get perfectly symmetrical left and right halves, that's a mid-sagittal plane. We also have the horizontal plane, which is sliced parallel to the ground, dividing the brain into upper or dorsal and lower or ventral portions. And finally, a standard cross-section, which is taken at a strict right angle to the neuraxis.
And this right here brilliantly synthesizes everything we've covered today. A standard cross-section is taken at a right angle to the neuraxis. But remember our upright human posture? Because of that exact 90-degree bend we anchored on earlier, a cross-section of the spinal cord is actually parallel to the ground, which is completely unlike a cross-section of the brain. The physical reality of our evolution directly dictates how we take medical imaging slices today. How cool is that?
Which brings us to a final thought experiment. You now have the full vocabulary of a neuroanatomist. So let me pose this challenge to you. If you were handed a functional MRI scan and your job was to find a tumor located in the exact dead center of the brain, which plane of section would you use to get the absolute clearest view? Would you go coronal, sagittal, horizontal? How would you use your medial and lateral coordinates to guide the surgeon? Keep that question in mind as you continue teaching and exploring the incredible world of neuroanatomy. You have the map now. It's time to start exploring.